Hi, welcome back. So I've been releasing videos on Homer's Odyssey and a few videos on book reviews for people who want to pick up more reading for their New Year's resolution. Hi, I'm Maria Haley, I'm the Millennial Classicist, and today's video we're going to be looking at father-son relationships in Virgil's Aeneid. I thought I'd have another look at the Aeneid, having looked at some different stuff for a little while, and pick up the thread for anyone who's studying the Aeneid, but also people who are just reading it for the first time, people who are perhaps intrigued. So, the thing to know about the Aeneid is that it's written in Augustan Rome. I say that as if there's just one thing you need to know about the Aeneid, but it's a pretty helpful place to start. That means that the Aeneid is shaped by a lot of Augustan values, and there's a massive debate on if the Aeneid was written as a form of pro-Augustan propaganda. So Augustus was the ruler at the time. He'd taken over from his predecessor Julius Caesar, who was also his adopted father. You might have heard of Augustus being referred to as Octavian, and that's because he gets the name Augustus when he takes over power. This factors into father-son relationships in the Aeneid because in the way that Augustus kind of inherits or tries to take over power from Julius Caesar, we see that these sort of bonds of father-son ties become really important in the Aeneid. So the idea of inheriting could be seen to be quite important. It's also really important because of Roman religion. So often when we think about Roman religion, we tend to think, oh, they pinched all the Greek gods and that's pretty much the end of it. And that's not really the case. The Romans invented their own gods for their own priorities and phenomena, like the goddess of war, Bellona, and we see Discordia as well, and Fama, like Rumor. But they also had a particular ancestral cult. Now we see this in the way that Julius Caesar is revered and prayed to because we have an imperial cult, so worshipping emperors, but also worshipping fathers and ancestors. The easiest, quickest way to think of this is if you've ever seen Disney's Mulan, when she goes in and visits all of the temples of her ancestors. I know that's really reductive. I know that Roman culture, ancient Roman culture, is really, really different from ancient Chinese culture, but it gives you an impression. You would have a family shrine, you would visit it and pay your respects to your predecessors, basically, and that would run from father to son. So within the Aeneid, father-son relationships become important because Aeneas, the key character whose destiny it is to found Rome, doesn't actually found Rome. He has to gain Latium, and then his son Ascanius will take over the rule of Alba Longa, and from there, slowly through the generations and through generations of Roman kings, Rome will eventually be founded. And we have lots of Augustan anachronisms in the Aeneid. I'll do a separate video on that and link it below. This means that Augustan kind of references and values are shoved into a heroic past. So you might see, for example, Aeneas looking out and seeing the site that will be Rome and imagining Rome. In the Aeneid, father-son relationships are perhaps most important, or most stressed, I should say, in Book 2, The Fall of Troy, because we see how each generation affects the decision-making of the other, and because we see Virgil linking the Aeneid and linking Aeneas to the Romans in the present. Aeneas is, after all, the ancestor that Virgil is speaking about. He is the Trojan hero who founds the dynasty of the Roman rulers. So in Aeneid Book 2, Troy is completely burning, and we've seen this before when we've looked at our other videos on the Aeneid. Everything not claimed by fire was now held by the Greeks. That means the Trojan horses entered the city, and that Virgil's hero, Aeneas, is looking to make his way out. He needs to escape. But Aeneas is very conflicted by this. He doesn't want to leave Troy and betray his king, but on the other hand, he knows he needs to in order to survive. There isn't going to be a Troy to save, and Virgil is always trying to keep that balance between Aeneas leaving to fulfill his destiny and Aeneas not looking really like he's abandoning Troy. So Ascanius, Aeneas' son, is really important to this decision making. The most famous image you'll probably see based on Aeneid Book 2, we see it on Roman coins and we see it in artwork as well, like more modern artwork, is Aeneas fleeing Troy with his father Anchises on his back and his son Ascanius being led by the hand. In his other hand, often he is grasping the Penates, so the images of the household gods. And this is how Aeneas comes to lose Creusa, his wife, who's dithering behind somewhere. But this is really important because every bit of Aeneas is bound up with his father, his past, his son, his future, and his penates, his gods, his present, his kind of moral compass, if you like, throughout the epic, and reverence for them. Pious Aeneas is his epithet. So past, present and future are all there together in Aeneas' grasp as he leaves Troy in Book 2. It's actually only when Iulus Ascanius, Aeneas' son, has his head burst into flames, not naturally, this is an unnatural prodigal flame, that Aeneas decides he needs to flee Troy. So it's in observance of his son rather than reverence for his father that Aeneas eventually decides to leave Troy. And it's really fitting actually that it's his son who gives him the sign and the prodigal flame, because Aeneas has to think of the future and let go of the past. Leaving Troy is a way of letting go of the past. So we see the three men really bound up in Aeneid Book 2. Book 2 is also important in terms of framing father-son relationships, because this is really compared to what we see happening in the palace. Priam's family, for example, Priam is the king of Troy, and his eldest son, his most prolific son, Hector, has died already. He's been killed by Achilles fighting for the Trojan side, as has his son Paris, who caused the Trojan War in the first place. In Book 2, it's Polites, Priam's remaining son, who is killed in front of him, and then Priam's body is dragged through the blood of Polites, only to be killed by Achilles' son, Neoptolemus. So we're seeing a complete turnover of generations here, where Achilles is no longer the prominent warrior in the Trojan War. He's dead, and his son is taking over with a worse kind of heroism. He's not really upholding any Homeric values or heroic values. He's even worse than Achilles, who abused Hector's body. So Achilles dragged Hector's body around the walls of Troy, and withheld his burial for quite a long time. And here what Neoptolemus does is worse, because he's dragging Priam through the blood of his son Polites. So we're seeing that father-son loyalties and father-son relationships are really important, and sometimes that doesn't really work out very well. Neoptolemus is even worse than Achilles in the way that he treats his enemies, and Priam has to die having watched all of his sons die. So these father-son relationships are really perverted. It's only Aeneas who gives us a sense of passing down good values and passing down the torch, and father-son relationships continue to be important. In Book 5 of the Aeneid, for example, Anchises has passed away, and Book 5 is completely preoccupied with the funeral games for Anchises. In Book 5, Aeneas rights a lot of wrongs we see in the funeral games in the Iliad. So in the Iliad, for example, Achilles holds funeral games for Patroclus, and he gets everything wrong. He gives prizes to the wrong people for the wrong reasons. People argue throughout the funeral games, whereas Aeneas is incredibly fair-minded. He awards the right prizes to the right people, and he provides sort of wine and prizes just to keep everybody sweet in the meantime. So it shows that he's a good leader, and that he's actually grieving for his father and, respecting his father's memory in a positive way in Book 5. In Book 6, we see Aeneas in the underworld, and he actually has a reunion with Anchises in Elysium. So Anchises appears in the kind of positive part of the underworld, so we should never explain the classical underworld as heaven and hell, but Elysium is the good neighbourhood. It's where you go if you've been good throughout your life, and Anchises certainly has. And we see really Anchises passing the torch to Aeneas and letting Aeneas become a better ruler after Book 6, because this marks the end of Aeneas' wanderings in different lands that he wants to found a new Troy in. He wants to find the next Troy. And it's only once Anchises has died, been buried and grieved for with the games, and been consulted in Book 6, that Aeneas embraces his mission actually to found a new city altogether, something that cannot be Troy. So the process of letting go is really important in handing over power from father to son in the first half of the Aeneid, really. After Book 6, father-son relationships are echoed in some of the Augustan anachronisms I mentioned before. So whereas we'd seen Iulus Ascanius have the prodigal flame from his head in Book 2, on Aeneas' shield in Book 8, we see Augustus going to fight Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium with his father's star above him and twin flames on his head. And this connects imperial cult with ancestral cult in some ways, because Julius Caesar is kind of pitched as Augustus's father, even though he's adopted, even though they're not biologically father and son. And this idea of taking over power and taking over control from your predecessor is legitimised in this kind of imagery. The star imagery and the idea of the flames again comes from imperial cult. So Julius Caesar, after his death, was considered to have been apotheosed and become godlike or become like a star. And the Apotheosis of Caesar was a poem written by Ovid to explain that kind of phenomenon, where we see the emperors become part of Roman religion. Again, really, really different from what we've perhaps seen with Greek religion. So father-son relationships aren't just part of character development, they're not just part of building a literary world, they're actually a really crucial part of Roman religion, and part of how Augustus and Caesar, were related to one another, and how the assumption of power was framed from Caesar to Augustus. This is mirrored as well in coinage we see around the time. So eventually Augustus's coins stop having Julius Caesar's face on them and start having the star on them instead, to see that power's really been handed over, and to kind of push Caesar out of the frame a little bit as Augustus gains power and influence in Rome. We come back to Ascanius again in book 9. So throughout the Aeneid, Ascanius has gone on a coming-of-age journey, really. Now, this isn't as striking as it perhaps is for Telemachus in the Odyssey, because we don't have an entire section committed to Ascanius. But in book 9, we see Ascanius as a teenager. So he's an infant, he's a very young boy when he leaves Troy. His father's kind of taken over power after book 6 when he's met Anchises. And in book 9, Ascanius kills his first, I can't say victim? Yeah, I guess they're in a battle, but he's still a victim. Ascanius kills Numanus. Now this is significant because Ascanius prays to Jupiter for success before he kills Numanus, and throughout the Aeneid we see a pattern of he who prays wins. That tends to work out really well. If someone's praying in the Aeneid, they're gonna get what they pray for, and it's kind of showing, that the pious win. It's a kind of moral feature of the Aeneid. And after Ascanius kills Numanus, we get this star imagery coming back in again. So after he kills him, Apollo comes forward and says to Ascanius, "Go forth with new value, boy. Thus is the path to the stars, son of gods that will have gods as sons." So this idea of father-son relationships becomes really crucial at Ascanius's coming of age killing in book 9. And this is because during book 9, Aeneas has had to go off and recruit soldiers from elsewhere. So Ascanius is acting up while his father is away. So again, this idea of power trickling down, it's not just about coming of age, it's not just about their personal relationships and their character development, it's passing the baton of who's in power at any given time and being prepared to take over the reins and be the person in power at any particular time. So they're the 3 kind of main threads to father-son relationships in the Aeneid. We've got imperial and ancestral cult, and we see this with the Penates and with the star imagery and with the comet imagery. In book 2, we also see it in book 8 on the shield of Aeneas. We have the idea of old versus new, out with the old and in with the new, and that's something that Aeneas grapples with for the first 6 books really of the Aeneid. He's reticent to leave Troy, and he doesn't really take over the reins until he's consulted with Anchises in the underworld. And we also have, the transference of power, and we see that with Augustus and Julius Caesar, and we see it playing into some of the imagery that we have on contemporary coins, but we also have it with Aeneas and Ascanius. So in book 9, when Aeneas isn't there, Ascanius has his first kill and has his coming of age experience at that point. I hope that video was helpful for you. If you're really interested in the Aeneid and would like any artwork based on the stories, have a look at my Redbubble store and I'll pop the link in the description below. Until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe and share to keep the channel going, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks!